Karl and I have been given the challenge to summarize and tell you all what you think and what you have concluded. And of course this is impossible, so we'll try to just recapitulate a little bit of what has been said and what the challenges are and what needs to be done and so forth. You might wonder what a distinguished fellow is. It's a title that somehow came up, and it's a title you can have if you have an academic background and have been an ambassador. So I think it sounds pretty good. So anyway, let me just say a quote from the speakers, a few points. I have taken a lot of notes, and I would not, of course, quote all of them, but a few points that I thought were quite interesting and that we can maybe get back to. Of course, the speaker immediately said that Asia is growing in importance and in many ways also in our minds, and that we have to deal with or East Asia specifically, and not least China. I have a background started as a sinologist, but I have quickly changed to become a Japanologist, and I, of course, think that we always forget Japan, because Japan is not only the soft superpower, it's the quiet superpower. And I think that the influence of Japan is greater than we might think. And that's one of the reasons why at the ISDP we created the Stockholm Japan Center, or just the Japan Center, where we also have a China Center and a Korea program that will be a Korea Center also. We think that it needs to be balanced all the time. And the question earlier was that why do you have so many Japan? Why should I go there and talk about Japan, or why should I go there and talk about Japan? Well, our simple answer is that there's enough space. We don't necessarily compete, but we complement each other. And there's so many things that you can study concerning Japan and other countries in Asia that there's absolutely room. And we can keep reminding us that we need to collaborate. The speaker also said that the Nordics have an impact. And he quoted former President Obama saying that the Nordics have a punch much over their weight. I think this sounds very good. I don't think that we should exaggerate our influence, but we are there all the time. In all the international fora, in almost all, you talk about the Nordics as a group, and a group that has influence. What do the Nordics say, and what do they not say, and where do they take a stand? What can we look at them, and so forth. So it's quite important. Then Cecilia Rutström-Ruin, she also pointed out that Asia is a very heterogeneous region. It's not one Asia, but many Asias that somehow has been put under this umbrella called Asia. And of course there are sub-regions that are quite important. There's Southeast Asia, East Asia, Northeast Asia, and so forth. But I think anyway there is as the Asian studies, or the Asian project that Ambassador Jungen was the initiator of earlier, was also quite important, because Asia it's a concept anyway, and it is important. But specifically here, I think we talk about East Asia. And I think that whether we like it or not, it will become more and more important. But then we also talked about what can be done. And Cecilia mentioned the free trade agreements and how important free trade is for Sweden and for the Nordic countries and for the EU. I think here is something where also the research can come in to provide studies and other basic support for the politicians to keep reiterating the importance of free trade. And I think this is a problem really when it comes to the relationship between, you mentioned the role of the government officials, and I think this is where a point that is quite important, and that is that the politicians, they cannot do the studies themselves. They need prepared documents where they can find the conclusions written by people who have the knowledge. And I think there's too little coordination between the academic side and the political side. The politicians, they rely on the bureaucrats provide documents that they can read and they can see the conclusions. And the bureaucrats, neither the bureaucrats and the politicians have time to read the real in-depth studies that the academics are producing. If they could, it would be very good, but there needs to be, I don't think they can, because they simply don't have the time, but there needs to be a channel between the academics and the decision makers where the academics maybe can take the initiative and say that we are here, if you need some information or some background before the foreign minister of Myanmar is coming, we can give it to you. I think this is something that is actually lacking. I'm also continuing and to what Frederick Shaw said, which was quite important. Do we know what we know and what we don't know about Asia? I think this is actually, it sounds like a Confucius quote, which it was, and it sounds like a cliche, but I think it is quite important that we shouldn't underestimate what we don't know and we shouldn't overestimate what we do know, but we should also make sure that we are underlining what we do know and communicate this. I think communication is one of the conclusions of this seminar. We need better communication. I don't want to point out who is to blame. Maybe there's no one to blame, but we need better communication between the different segments and between the different players. Also, I found it interesting that he said that Asians like to compete. And I'd also like the sentence he said, in fact, they are benchmark fanatics. I think this was quite interesting. I haven't heard that before. And I wrote it down and underlined it. And then he also said that we need to look on East Asia with other glasses than US glasses. We shouldn't, because they have power to produce all these reports and studies, we shouldn't put on the US glasses necessarily. Sometimes it might be good, but I think we should avoid being led by others. And we have our own big, deep pockets of knowledge. And then he also pointed out, yes, it was he, that we need open communication. I think the more open communication we have, the better the communication. He also pointed out, which I thought was quite correct, that the people-to-people contacts and the business contacts are also a driving force when it comes to relations between countries. We talk about it has become very popular to talk about the Swedish, for instance, the Swedish-China relation, stopping with an N, or the US-Japan relation. And I myself prefer to put an S on the relations, because there are so many segments of the relationships between two countries or blocks of countries. You have the people-to-people contacts, you have the business contacts, you have the academic contacts, you have the family ties, and you have divorces, you have, everything going on. And you need, for relationships to work, you need to look at all the aspects. And for researchers also, you need to look at all the aspects and not be, for instance, when it comes to North Korea, be blinded by the aggressive rhetoric that they sometimes put up. There are some other facts behind that, I think. Then I'd like to quote Marie, who I think pointed out many interesting things, despite my criticism of you before. You said that we have to choose the right people, and that is very essential when it comes to research. This sounds like something that, of course, but there's a deeper knowledge behind that, to choose the right people to be the right players when we interact. And you also said that by coming together and finding partners, we can be more efficient. And we shouldn't forget the East Asian partners or the Asian partners. It's not only us looking for them, it's also them looking for us. But then you said the thing I objected to. We can't expect government officials to do the work. I think we should expect them to do the work, but we should also do the work, and we should complement each other. I don't think we really disagreed. But then you also said something very important. We should not only promote Sweden or promote ourselves or EU. We should listen to Asia. And I think this is really something which we need to underline all the time. That yes, we have come a long way, but so have the Asians, and they sometimes have gone beyond us, and we should have a humble approach and listen to them, because they are our equals in many ways, and it's important not to have of course, to have ideas that are influenced by prejudices and so forth, but we have one mouth and two ears, and I think this is something that we need to remember. And he also said we need visions. I think this is something that, I agree. We need visions. Then I'm not so sure I agree that we should underline a good vision is to have Stockholm as the hub of Japanese studies. It sounds a bit because Europe is wide. You have Italy, you have Spain, you have Ireland, we need many centers of Japanese studies, but we can be one of the strongest centers but of course, as a slogan, it's good. But I'm sure that if we say Stockholm is the best, or is the hub of Japanese studies in a meeting with a French person, he or she wouldn't immediately agree that this is a good thing to say. So, I mean, I shall not be too long. I think that I stop there, and I think that we have plenty of time for questions and comments and discussions and so forth, but most of all, we have plenty of time for Karl to say what he has to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished fellow. Right. Yes.
Just distinguished.
Well, distinguished. Yes. Yeah, well, I'm a fellow as well, just not distinguished. I'm just a senior research fellow, not distinguished. I need to become ambassador first to become distinguished. We'll see what happens with that. But I think you did a very good job summarizing some of the key points that have been raised during the day. I will narrow the focus a bit and focus more on specific issues having to do with research and research funding mainly. And these are issues that many of the speakers today have raised, but these are also issues that have been very central to my life in academia since I started out 11 years ago. I first applied for funding. I applied for funding to do a PhD. I applied in spring 2006. That was the first time I applied for funding. And since then I have applied many times, and I have spent lots of time applying for funding. And I've been relatively successful. I think I've received close to 14 million Swedish kronor. But only a very tiny part of this funding has been earmarked for Asia research. And of that funding that has been earmarked, most of it has come from foreign sources, mostly from Japan, from the Japan Foundation, for example. So only a very, very tiny part of it, probably around 100 or 150 or 200 maybe, have been earmarked, Swedish earmarked Asia-specific funding. So there hasn't been much funding out there to apply for that has been earmarked for Asia research in Sweden. At least not since I started out. Maybe we've heard some speakers mentioning that in the 90s there were these programs launched. But I think also that this is not something that's my experiences are not these are experiences that other people share as well. So most of the people at the Asia program at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs are externally funded and were externally funded when they did their PhDs. And this was general funding. So if there wasn't for this general funding, we as a research environment wouldn't exist. We're not the result of initiatives that have earmarked funding specifically for Asia funding, for research on Asia. And this, I think that, of course, we should be able to compete for the general funding. We have to be able to compete for that funding. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But at the same time, many of the speakers today have mentioned that there's a lot of insecurity and fragility. So Niklas mentioned this, that there's insecurity concerning funding issues and so on. Börje Ljunggren mentioned that the resources are currently scattered among several research environments and that these research environments, they're underfunded. Eva Hansson went deeper into the issues having to do with the conditions under which we do research. And we also heard from my colleague Linus Hagström that research environments can be very fragile, and this fragility makes it very difficult to do the kind of slow research that Marina Svensson mentioned. And I believe that slow research is a great ideal. I would love to do slow research. And I think that when I become full professor and have a permanent position, then I will do slow research. And I think the result will be much better than the research I currently do. I honestly think so. I think we need more time to sit down and read, and not just sit down and write. Because that's what I've been doing for the last 11 years. I've been writing. I've been writing my dissertation. I've been writing applications for funding. I've been writing articles and trying to get these articles published in order to become associate professor. And now that I'm associate professor, I need to become full professor. And for that, I need to apply for funding to get PhD students. Now I have that funding, so I need to recruit them. But there's this constant search for funding and these fragile conditions under which we work that makes it very difficult to do slow research, to live up to this ideal. Therefore, I think that earmarked funding is necessary. And this is something that I think many of the speakers today, including those representing the government, they stressed that Asia is becoming increasingly important, that research on Asia is very important, and that it's important that such research is conducted in Sweden in order to prevent that we only see the world, we only see Asia through American glasses, as Frederick Shaw mentioned and as several speakers have repeated. So Asia-specific funding would be very useful for supporting the efforts that we're making at building strong research environments and a strong research community that can cooperate to a greater extent. It could never replace, I think, general funding, but it could help us acquire general funding to a greater extent. And it would make us a little less fragile. And maybe it would make our research slightly slower and lead to better research. So I think that if there was more Asia-specific funding, we could do much more than we are currently doing. And I think that we're currently doing quite a lot, but we could do much more. Thank you. I'll stop there.
We have plenty of time. Not only 10 minutes, we can take more time if you need to, because there's also time set aside for mingling. So what's on your heart? You can just open up and confess. Yes, Vargö.
May I make a small confession then?
Yes, please.
It's a personally over the years the experience I had when I completed this Asia strategy study in 1998. I was visiting Singapore, and the then ambassador Eva Vargö, she organized a little seminar where I presented my findings, and there was a very distinguished Chinese professor present, had been vice chancellor in Hong Kong, and now he was a very distinguished professor in Singapore. And he was there, and he was one of them who commented. And he said, after he listened to me, he said, "Oh, I have learned an immense lot from you about Sweden." It was, of course, what you had to expect. It was, what did I look for? Democracy, human rights, sustainable development, the environment, and so forth. And all these values. So what he extracted from my intervention was basically what guided us in our thinking. And of course, then I'm a little bit puzzled by because my ideas as whatever I am, less distinguished than you for sure, is not to project all those values on my sleeve, but it's rather to pursue a dialogue and open up many vistas that deepen our common understanding. And certainly, if we only go there to preach today, also as Asia is emerging, for example, preaching in China by telling what they should do and not do, I think it doesn't work at all. But there are other ways of doing it, which are more profound and more humble and so forth and more empathetic, but not less clear when it comes to your own values.
Yes. More comments? Really? Yes, please.
I think Karl touched upon what many of us have probably experienced, namely the lack of research funds that are particularly marked for Asian-related research. This is a huge problem, because I think also that in the communication between, for example, institutes like the ISDP and so on, I think that people tend to think, who are outside the university, that inside the university people have time to do the slow research and so on. Well, they are actually only hunting. You get your PhD, you get the license to hunt for funding, and then you continue to hunt. And finally, when you are full professor, you can get perhaps compete for a permanent position. And it's fairly long time between PhD and full professor for most people. So the question is, how do we actually keep some kind of professional academics within the system and not just leave? Because I think that we also need actually researchers in the universities in the field of Asian studies. And they are very few at this moment. They are actually embarrassingly few.
Yeah. Very important. Anyone who would like to comment on going from license to hunt to license to kill?
It's quite natural that academics are asking for richer funding, for more money. But what we heard today, I think, is that there are a lot of counter effects, or if you formulate it, a little softer side effects of existing structures. And I don't believe that just putting more money into the existing structures will solve the problem. It will weaken the negative effects. And what we also heard today is that there is a gap between the typical academic research, or the old style academic research, mainly putting emphasis on the freedom and liberty of research and long-term perspective, while all the players, other players in the society want to have research which is helpful for making decisions or short-term. I think finally the truth or the solution lies in the middle, and I think that's we won't revolutionize structures just by saying the structure is counterproductive. But what's possible, I think, is to discuss fields which Karl White called the mid-range theories, and we can apply this thinking into mid-range research projects. And I think one hint we can get from the business, which also became more short-term orientated and give up mid-term social research about the social environment of doing their business, might be a rich field where collaboration between different researchers and stakeholders is possible.
I don't know, Mr. Björk, would you like to comment on the business perspective of what has been said?
Yes, my background is in Ericsson, but I retired now, it's already 5 years ago from this, but I worked for Ericsson since 75 with Asia, and but I'm still doing some kind of, I'm still advisor to Ericsson. But one thing is that we were supporting the China Center here at the Stockholm School of Economics, and that was, we started the discussion in 2005 to 2006. I was sitting in the board, still in the board of director for MARI, the Japanese Institute, and we saw that it getting more and more focus on China, and that was natural. I mean, it was not just that we liked to do it, but because China's getting the importance. And then we took up, say that we should try to form a China Institute. So, of course, naturally, when I was in Ericsson, but I thought it difficult. We were intentionally free, but to make it short, we had some discussion. But that was quite, in a way, we talked directly to the CEO at that time, Karl-Henrik Svanberg, and CFO, Karl-Henrik Sundström, who is now the CEO of Stora Enso. And they saw immediately the importance of Asia and the importance of having a study in Sweden on Asia economic. But they saw the difficulties in it, that for the big area in China since 1892, it's not that because that we really need it, but it's important for society. So, and to start to try to find 3 sponsors, it will never be realized. You cannot find that. So the question was from our CEO, go home from the Stockholm School, how much money do you need to start it up? Okay, 5 million a year. All right, let's be taking 3 years, and then you can run yourself. But I think it's important to try to get more involvement with the business. But it's the same as the political. You have to have a dialogue, you have to have understanding on it. And one thing that I'm missing also here is to come in the outreach. You have to come back to deliver something that they really can understand and need. But there is a lot of understanding, it's a lot of academic reports, but to make some, taking it out, give it to the political, to give it to the business side of it. But I still, that has been said in many of the reports on future of Sweden, future of education, that you have to cooperate more with the business. But that is very difficult. I have to have a dialogue with the business, and it's not easy to understand of it. And then you must deliver something that they understand also.
Thank you very much. Staying. Just to reflect briefly on this, I have just some experience, some side experience with companies in Norway mainly. And there are anyway 3 phases where they can bring in someone who does studies on social and environmental or political affairs. One is when they start to take interest in a new country or a new area. And that has happened. This is nice. And then there is a phase where they are working on an investment opportunity and they are in doubt about whether or not to invest. That's when I want to be asked to come. Because then it really counts what I'm saying. But that has not happened. I get in the last phase, when the CEO has decided that he wants the investment, but he knows that there may be critical voices in the board. And then he asks me to write a report about political risk, and he pays whatever sum I ask for it. And then he goes to the board to tell the board that we have done this critical study, and you can see all these arguments against the investment, but we have gone through them carefully, and we have found that we welcome it, take it anyway, and we can manage this risk. And then my warnings have been for nothing.
Of course, there are a lot of to take now Ericsson game that we can, and also Stockholm School of Economics. There's a lot of different smaller and bigger works that are done, ongoing, have internships, a lot of it, which are very, very useful. But I think that the difference here in Sweden, and as we are in Sweden now, and US, you have big departments in the, there's a lot of cooperation, we do a lot of work together, research work, we do it in cooperation with companies and so on. Here it is a little still, I would say, it's more separate work, let's say, please deliver a report, but you are probably do it yourself and not in cooperation with the company so much. So involvement from the, that's what I mean, involvement from a business circle also.
And before you have decided.
But sometimes it's that is of course it can be different, but I think it's very important. That was also what our CEO said, that it's not that we need it, but it's good to have an external viewpoint of course, how I use it is another. I think. But I think it's very important.
Next on the list is Eva.
Yeah, I know this question about research support and so on by business is often a contentious issue within universities. But I think that perhaps one could think of it in two different ways. What you mentioned seems perhaps more to do consultancy work for big companies or something like that. But I mean, I think that companies like Ericsson and so on may be interested in supporting more general research and so on. And also, I mean, the big transnational companies in Sweden, they are also in need of employees who actually know something about Asia. So, and in order for that to happen, we need to have someone who is able to teach about it. And we need to have researchers. So I think that within the academia, we should not be so afraid of finances from business. We should actually open up such a discussion.
Yeah. Marina?
I want to come back to what Karl said and what you were hinting at. This kind of constantly applying for funding is something that not only scholars working on Asia, all scholars at universities are doing that, so we are not an exception. I think it's important to remember that also, unless we feel that we are discriminated against. So that's one thing. Another thing is to sort of try to convince not only the external funders, but actually even more importantly, maybe our own universities to do, when they make priorities, and they do make priorities, and at university general level, at faculty level. So that's also, I think, very, very essential, how universities make priorities. They talk a lot about internationalization, they talk a lot about the importance of taking on more challenges, etc. But actually, to sort of convince them that actually Asia is important for a variety of reasons, not only these short-term reasons. But I think if we want to do something, and several people mentioned SAPS, Johan mentioned that, and I think Vargö also and others, that they had this program where they put in money for PhD students and postdocs, and they also have these PhD schools, etc. And it was kind of good, and it led to some people actually got permanent positions in the end through their hard work, of course. But this is also something that I feel that there is a need for, even more maybe if you want to have targeted money at that level rather than at the next level when you apply for grants. So I would like to modify that a little bit, what you said. And also actually you did get you did get targeted money when you came to the center for a postdoc.
Yeah, I don't count that.
Yeah. You don't. No, just a joke.
How much was that?
That was 2 years, full time.
I'll have to calculate that. The other funding. But I think you're absolutely right that it's the kind of funding that's needed primarily is for doctoral students and for postdocs, and maybe a little funding for before that phase. Linus mentioned it earlier today. In order to pick up the good master students, to give them an internship where they get actually a scholarship. So and then get them into a doctoral program, because it can be difficult to find and nurture these people who have very great potential. But back to about raising funds from businesses, I think Marie has been very successful in getting companies to fund PhD students, but I think it might be, many of them, they focus on business. I think it's easier in that area rather than if you deal with political science, for example. I know some people, some of the program directors at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, they've tried to get companies to support research on Russia, for example. But they wanted to have to be more directly linked to what they are doing in their businesses. But your experiences would be interesting to hear more about.
So we have a research program on East Asian economics and business. And at the moment we have 4 candidates in the program. We're getting a 5th in the autumn. And they are sponsored by companies, big Swedish companies. And that has been a big boost to the Institute, I think, in getting an atmosphere also where there are some researchers. And here I think PhDs are extremely good. We have one of them here actually also, because they are interested in what's happening in Asia. And if you have a few PhDs around and you're getting some speakers, they're going to have an audience and someone who's really interested in what they are going to say. So I think that is.
Thank you. We have a voice from the publishing industry.
I took my name off of takeoff. Just call me Dave. I have nothing to do with this case. You can tell from my accent probably where my mother lives, approximately. I was impressed that nobody today talked about foundations or funders as theory-driving organizations, by which I mean in the early 1990s when I was in grad school, my mentor said flat out, the reason there are so many publications and so much research on civil society is because MacArthur Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation said that's what they're interested in. So it's fascinating to me that at the same time that we all are dependent on funders, we haven't said a single word about the politics of that dependence. And that's enough. I'll leave my second point for another time.
Well, thank you very much. Anyone who would like to comment on that? Could we have a voice or voices from PhD students and interns also maybe? Any volunteers? Yes, in the back.
I myself come from Germany, and I think the largest problem to have more PhD student positions at the university is the level in between the BA programs and the PhD programs at universities, as I see it. Now, since 2 years ago, we have established an MA program in Asian Studies at our Department of Asian, Middle Eastern and Turkish Studies. And in the first year, there were just 6 students enrolled. I think half and half from Sweden and half from outside. Now, for the second year, there are 16, and among them 10 from other countries. So I see there is this gap, that not so many students are interested in continuing on the MA level, because I see the degree is differently appreciated here, especially if I compare it with my home country. So we have this challenge, I would say, in Asian studies at Stockholm University at least. I would like to listen to the other universities' experience in this case. To specify, our East Asian Studies program is focused on giving knowledge based on the sources in Asian language. This may be also different to other universities here in Sweden.
So I think maybe Monica and Anna could expand on that based on the experiences in Lund.
Many of them are continuing with PhD studies, but unfortunately not on Asian studies. So they are applying at other departments or going abroad for Asian studies. So that could be one thing that we very much would like to have a PhD program in Asian studies.
Asian studies, and it doesn't exist anymore. It's our Russia Center, Research Center, and there was a program, also a master program in Asia or East Asia studies, and most of those students taken that were actually international students. So I think there's a connection there that you don't really see where you're going to go after you have that degree, because there's really no research environment to continue to do that kind of research in Sweden. It's weak, but then that's just an observation of whether we should support more regional area studies or whether there will be other ways to go. I don't know.
Yes, please. Well, Göran Blomqvist, Riksbankens jubileumsfond. I have planned to be quiet today, but there are a number of questions that I would like to comment a bit on. Is it possible for you to hear me?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah.
First of all, if I compare, so to speak, research on Asia with research on other topical fields like the Middle East, sub-Saharan Africa, on post-genome research and ethics, on effects of globalization, on artificial intelligence, and a number of other important research field challenges for research and for humanity, society, whatever. I can conclude that the application on Asia are about as successful as applications in other fields. You get, so to speak, your percentage, if I just do it like that brutal way. And another way to comment is that my picture of the field is that Swedish research, or the research that we are funding, because that is not only Swedish research, it's research connected in one way or another to Sweden. It's of good quality, sometimes very good quality, internationally very good quality. That was, when we funded STAIN, we heard that from the expert that we consulted before the decision making, and then during the travel. At a couple of times we had external experts, so they said that this is of good quality. Two points so far: good quality, and you are as successful within the Jubileumsfond and as other fields of research. And then you come to the question about should we make earmarked support? Well, we did that back in the 1990s and the beginning of after the year 2000. Then we funded the SAPs. It was a PhD schools. It was a number of postdocs, etc. At that time, we and Stint decided that it didn't function to connect this with the university. So we work with a kind of network model, but no university liked to continue, so to speak. There was no interest in that. And I could continue like this and be a bit aggressive maybe, but I will come to a conclusion very fast. I think maybe the problem is, well, that has been said today. The problem is that the resources are too spread out in the Swedish landscape. I think if we, in the future, then should take under consideration to fund research, I think it's necessary to say that it should go to certain places. And I would say that the city in Sweden that has failed to cooperate seemed to be Stockholm. We have made a number of attempts in helping to create networks and so forth. CIPRE was mentioned here today, and so forth. I will go into no details. But it seems that other parts of the country have been more successful, and maybe we should, if we come back to this, say, well, we are willing to support it there.
Stockholm is the hub of Japanese studies.
Yes, exactly. But now we are talking about Asia.
And I don't think, I mean, there's lots of cooperation going on.
I'm a PhD student and from the Australia National University where we have a college of the Asian Pacific, of course, because of the situation in the region. But what I find there, which I think is very interesting even among undergraduates that do not belong to the college, is that they often have this very big interest in a specific Asian country. So even lawyers and people studying economics will try to do a double degree where they become lawyers, but also sort of specialists in Japanese law or Chinese law. And the same thing, they often see it as very useful if they're studying a business degree to also study Chinese or Mandarin, etc. So I think that's a very interesting experience to see how do you get students to become interested in doing something else than their traditional degree, which is quite unusual here, at least among lawyers. I'm one myself. And it's also interesting to see how the engagement they have had in the region. So they often, when they're younger, they've been to do volunteer work or exchange studies in the region. All very interesting models for sort of fostering that interest in a different country.
Thank you. Any more? If not, I think on behalf of the director of the ISDP and all the others at the ISDP who have worked on this and all the others at other institutes and organizations that have worked on this, thank you for participating, and let's keep in touch and let's do more of this. I think it has been extremely useful, and I thank you all, and let's thank ourselves with a big applause. Yes?
Coffee outside.
Coffee outside.